We are here in Morongo Valley
Morongo Valley.
with
Wendy Lee Gadzuk.
So Wendy, you do work that's sort of peripheral to the medical world. Usually I talk to people who do work about their own medical experiences, but in your case, yours sort of came about because of your partners. But
Yes.
before we get to that, what kind of work were you doing before
the thing?
the incident?
Well, I do mainly assemblage work. I've been working. I went to school for jewelry and metalsmithing, so hence my jeweler's bench. I still have a lot of the same. I use a lot of those techniques, but it kind of morphed. I started focusing more on music for a lot of years.
Were you in a band?
Yeah, I've been in a lot of bands. In Philly, I had a band called the 440s. We moved to Tucson. Sucker Star in Los Angeles. Cockpit, Whiskey Bitch. And I'm just starting a Motorhead tribute band here called Motordead. But the artwork kind of morphed from the fine jewelry work into larger scale assemblage work.
So you were doing this work, and then I don't know your history with your partner, how long you were together, or what
We've been
happened to him.
together.
I just know he's
paralyzed.
uses a wheelchair.
Yeah, he's paraplegic. We've been together about a little over 5 years now, but he's been paraplegic since 2007, which is long before I met him. But he had they call it a AAA, which is an abdominal aortic aneurysm. He was living in Rhode Island at the time. His aorta burst, which is something that kills, at that time, over 90% of the people who get it die from it. So they stitched him up, got him back together. He's got I think like a pig aorta right now. But during the recovery, something happened where, he came out of the coma, he was fine. They put him back into another induced coma and didn't turn him, so all the blood kind of pooled in his hips, and he came out of that one paralyzed from the chest down.
So you've landed up sort of incorporating his experience into your artwork. You use a lot of the medical supplies. And
Yeah.
There's a couple other artists I work with who use medical supplies, but they're their own medical supplies. They save them. You're the first person I know who's used someone else's medical supplies. So why don't you talk about your thought process in adding his medical supplies into your work?
Because he's paralyzed, he gets pressure wounds, and one of them got badly infected and turned into sepsis. And by the time we took him to the hospital, he was actually had severe sepsis, was close to organ shutdown. Because he went to a hospital and came out paralyzed. So I'm sure there's a little bit of like a mental block into going to hospitals and some probably untreated PTSD related to being in a hospital. So he tends to put it off and put it off for way too long. But so, yeah, he had severe sepsis. He's very strong. His immune system is very strong, and he recovered. But it was about a year of, probably more than half of it was in the hospital, in a nursing facility, and then home in between, and I was doing wound care. It was scary what was coming out of the wound, I mean, that's his life force, and I can see his life force coming out of his body. And I wasn't really doing a lot of art at that time because I was exhausted mentally and physically, and a lot of anxiety, more than I'd ever experienced before. Not knowing when it was time for me to just say, this is more than I can handle, like, you need to go back in the hospital. But also like really wanting to be with him and wanting him to be home, where home is probably a better place to heal than a hospital. But I started seeing, on top of like just being the caregiver and being in that role, there was also the issue of like, holy crap, like, look at all this waste we're creating, and we're only one person. I had this pile of like, the used saline syringes. I started saving his bandage packaging and some of the IV tubing, and I just the first piece I made was called the Tree of Life, an assemblage piece with some syringe caps, and I put it together in between these two silver candelabras in this big kind of like altar-like frame, and I thought it looked like a tree of life, and I thought about the significance of this experience that was, close to death, and these are the things that kind of helped save him. So, you talk about this being about his experience, but it's also about my experience, and because I can speak more about my experience of.
I have another artist who talks about how every piece of medical supply has a story that goes with it.
Mm-hmm.
Every sharps container, every IV tube, it's got a story for
Mm-hmm.
that person.
Mm-hmm.
So you might be making one pattern, but he might look at it and have completely different memories with each of the materials that you're using.
Yeah. And that's interesting because I have not really gotten his input about it from that perspective. I mean, he'll look at it and appreciate it as a piece of art, but I still think that personalizing it makes him uncomfortable because it was a very unpleasant experience.
And what about when you look at it? Because you do these things that if you don't really look, the first time I saw your work, I saw them from far away, and I thought, oh, these are just beautiful. And then I got a little closer. I'm like, oh, it's all medical supplies. How do you look at them? Do you look at them with a memory to each individual piece, or do you look at them as one composition?
I more look at it as a memory of a time because I don't know, what day I use this syringe because they're all the same. And it kind of marks a period in time for me. So it's more about just the period and the experience as opposed to each individual day and each individual time.
Well, a lot of times the artists I work with, when they do work that's about their illnesses, people come up and they relate to the work because they've had a similar experience.
Mm-hmm.
Or they've gone through the same thing. So
Mm-hmm.
do you get this, even though the work is not specifically about you, do people come up and go, oh, I remember that? Or do you get into conversations about medical waste, medical treatment, being a caregiver?
Yeah, I did. I had lots and lots of conversations, and it was maybe a week or two into the show, I decided, I'm like, I should start documenting these, and I wrote them down, and I asked people if I could take their pictures, and I did a blog post about it, because it triggers more than just words. It's like you can talk, and then you see it, and you can feel something from what you see. I think the more senses you get involved with anything, the more powerful it's going to be, I think.
You're doing work about death, but all this material is about keeping people alive.
Yeah, but we're all going to die someday too.
What? Wait.
Nobody told you that?
I didn't read that.
Oh man, sorry to be the one to burst your bubble.
Well, on that note, thank you for talking to me.
Thank you for talking to me.